The New York Times reports that because Flynn had not told everything about his conversations with the Russian ambassador, quote, the Justice Department feared that Mr. Flynn could be vulnerable to blackmail by Moscow and that this had been communicated to the White House last month. David Sanger, is the New York Times national security correspondent, and he joins us now. Good morning, David.
Good morning. Good to be with you, Norah.
Given that the Justice Department had warned the White House about this late last month, how long was the White House planning to keep a security threat as the head of the NSC?
It's a great question because these issues have been swirling around General Flynn for at least a month. And remember, what started all of this was the imposition of sanctions against Russia by President Obama in return for their interference in the election. So the question here is, if President Trump knew about this and knew of the Justice Department concern, which appears to have come from Sally Yates, the Deputy Attorney General, who he fired not long ago for her unwillingness to enforce the immigration restrictions. Was he planning to just ignore this piece of evidence until it became public and he couldn't any longer?
David, is your reporting that General Flynn was acting on his own when he discussed these sanctions with the Russians, or was it an authorized discussion, which suggests either the Chief of Staff or the President knew about it as well?
Well, there's nothing unusual in talking to foreign diplomats during a transition. Almost every presidential transition does that, and General Flynn made that point in his resignation letter. The problem would come if he actually made a promise, in this case, that the sanctions would be lifted or taken care of once President Trump came into office. And it's not clear that he did that. And in fact, we've had some people tell us that the actual contents of this transcript, because apparently the conversation was being wiretapped by the NSA or the FBI, probably the FBI, is ambiguous. You raise a very good question. What were General Flynn's instructions? And he said himself in a tweet this morning that while he was responsible, there are others who are responsible too.
That tweet has not yet been verified from a verified account yet.
I'm glad to hear that.
Just to be clear.
That point. So I'm glad you corrected me on that. And
we don't know yet. But,
I think you've raised the right question, which is, was he acting on instructions?
What is he acting alone? I think is a question today.
David, you've written about this week about the ongoing turmoil in the President's National Security Council. Where does this leave the Security Council now? Flynn's resignation.
Well, the council is in considerable disarray right now, and the disarray comes from the fact not only that General Flynn was under this cloud, but also from the fact that they had not filled out many of the key positions, that it was unclear who was responsible for what. You had a lot of anxiety from the career staff who had stayed around and was not yet feeling as if they were involved in the conversations. And we've had some decisions made. You mentioned one earlier concerning North Korea, but there were others, particularly that raid in Yemen, which we discussed a few weeks ago, where it wasn't clear that there were sort of clear pathways to making decisions in a sort of regular order with the right kind of advice and legal counsel.
Yeah, this morning, David, a senior Russian official is suggesting that the decision for Mr. Flynn to resign or be fired, whichever you choose to believe, was meant to damage the relations between the U.S. and Russia. I even heard the phrase Russiaphobia. Does that make any sense to you?
You know, compared to what we've learned in the past few months, Gayle, about what the Russians did during the course of the election, the disinformation campaigns, the Russian intelligence agencies stepping in to steal emails and then make them public, it strikes me that this would be a pretty small contributor to the overall relationship.
And just quickly, David, you write about North Korea in the New York Times today, and why this recent missile test is significant, in part because these types of missiles provide little advance warning if we, the U.S., wanted to take a preemptive strike, correct?
That's right. These missiles use solid fuel, and that means that they can be rolled out and launched really in a matter of minutes. The older technology was liquid, and you'd have a lot of warning because satellites would probably see a missile being launched on a launch pad. You have some time to react. take a counter-strike, prepare your anti-missile defenses.
All
so
right.
while it's not a missile that could reach the U.S., it's certainly worrisome.
All right, David Sanger, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Good to talk to you.
Always good to talk to you.